You ever carry a secret so heavy it makes your bones ache even when you smile? I'm over 60 now, and for most of my life, I was just a shadow inside my own skin. People saw me at church, at the grocery store, at PTA meetings. They never knew what my brother did to me when the lights were off, or how my father silenced me with his fists when I tried to scream. I was just a girl, and nobody protected me. But something happened. A miracle. And that's why I'm here. If you're listening, I need you to know my story matters. Because maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear this before it's too late. If you believe stories like mine should be heard, please like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. It reminds me I'm not alone anymore. My name is Caroline Hughes. I'm 63 years old. Born and raised in a quiet little town in Indiana where people smiled a lot and gossiped even more. I was the oldest of three. My brother, Jesse, was 2 years younger than me. To everyone else, he was the golden boy, handsome, helpful, and polite. But behind closed doors, when the hallway lights dimmed, Jesse was someone else. Someone only I saw. This is not a story I ever thought I'd tell out loud. But silence didn't save me. So today, I'm going to speak for that scared little girl I used to be, and maybe for someone out there who still is. I was just 13 when it happened. Mama had gone to visit Aunt Lou in the next town over. Daddy was working the late shift at the factory, and Jesse and I were left home alone. That wasn't unusual. He was 11, I was old enough to babysit, and our house was considered safe. Normal. I remember I was reading a book in my room. Jesse came in without knocking. He said he was bored, and could he sit with me? I said yes. We were always close. I used to think he was the only one who really understood me. But that night, something shifted. He sat too close. I could feel the heat of his body against mine, and then his hand brushed my arm. At first, I thought nothing of it, but it lingered, moved, slid across my chest. I froze. Jesse, I said, confused. What are you doing? He smiled. That same smile he used when he was proud of himself for scoring a goal or solving a math problem. Like this was something he was supposed to do. Just playing, he whispered. Don't tell anyone. That was the first time. He didn't stop. He didn't hit me. He didn't yell. But he stole something from me that night. Something I never got back. The next morning, I told myself maybe it was just a bad dream. I tried to be normal, but I avoided him. I kept my door locked. I stayed outside as much as I could. But none of it worked. He always found a way. He waited until no one was around. Until the house was quiet. And then he'd appear like a shadow, smiling, whispering, threatening. One time, I told him I would tell Mama. You do that, he said. And Dad'll find out what you let me do. Let me do. I didn't let him. But he made me believe I was dirty. That it was my fault. And when I finally gathered the courage to cry to Daddy, his reaction was even worse than the abuse. But I'll tell you that part soon. For now, just sit with me. Listen. If you've ever been hurt by someone you trusted, please know you're not alone. And I'm not ashamed to say this happened to me, not anymore. I told him. God help me, I told him. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Daddy had just finished fixing the old fence out back. His hands were still dusty, and he reeked of sweat and tobacco. I'd been pacing in my room all day, trying to find the right words, choking on everyone. But when I heard Jesse laughing in the living room, like nothing had ever happened, something inside me broke. I walked straight up to Daddy while he was rinsing off at the sink. My voice was shaking so hard, I could barely hear myself. Daddy. Jesse touched me. He stopped. The water kept running. For a second, I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. Then slowly, he turned around. Wiped his hands on a towel. His eyes were heavy, like he'd just heard I'd burned the house down. What did you say? He asked. I repeated it, word for word, just like the preacher said to do when you speak truth. Instead of holding me or asking me what happened, Daddy slapped the towel down on the counter and walked past me without a word. I followed him confused, scared, but hoping maybe he was going to talk to Jesse, maybe he'd protect me. But he didn't go to Jesse. He went to the closet, pulled out his belt, that thick, black leather one he only used when he was real angry. Then he turned on me. "You trying to ruin this family, girl?" he shouted. "Daddy, please, I didn't." He came into my room. "You think I don't know girls like you?" he barked, stepping toward me. Always looking for attention. Always stirring up filth. Then he hit me. Right across the back. Once. Twice. 3 times. I didn't cry out. I just collapsed. The sting burned like fire, but the shame, that burned worse. Jesse stood in the hallway, watching, and I swear to you, he smirked. I lay on the floor for what felt like forever. Daddy stood over me, panting. "You ever say something like that again, I'll throw you out of this house. You hear me?" I nodded. I didn't have a choice. And just like that, I knew I wasn't just alone. I was trapped. I know this is hard to hear. It's hard to say, too. If you're still with me, thank you. Really. Please take a second to like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you believe stories like mine need to be heard. And drop a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. It helps more than you know. After that beating, I stopped speaking unless I had to. My ribs were sore for days, but I never told Mama. She would have just said I tripped or did something stupid again. That's what she always said when I came in bruised or limping. So I started hiding. First, I stayed out in the yard, sitting behind the woodpile until dark. But Jesse found me there. He always found me. He was patient. He'd wait until no one was looking, then whisper things to me through his teeth. Threats, promises, warnings. And that smile, that same crooked smile he always wore like a badge of power. So I started locking myself in the linen closet. It was small, cramped, but it was the only place I could breathe. I'd curl up next to the ironing board with a blanket and a flashlight and pretend I was invisible. I'd count the seconds between footsteps. I memorized every creak in the hallway floorboards. I knew when Mama was in the kitchen by the rhythm of her knife on the cutting board. I knew when Daddy was home by the way the screen door snapped. But Jesse, he was unpredictable. One night, I thought I was safe. I hadn't heard him in hours. I stayed in the closet until my legs went numb. When I finally tiptoed out to use the bathroom, he was waiting outside the door. He didn't say a word, just grabbed my wrist and dragged me back into my room. I tried to scream, but the fear was like concrete in my throat. That night, he didn't stop at touching. And I lost something I didn't even understand at the time. Afterward, he told me if I told anyone again, he'd kill the dog. Then he smiled and said, "You're not a real sister anymore. You're mine." I stopped eating for a while after that. I'd pick at my food until Mama yelled. My body changed. My thoughts twisted. I started to feel like a ghost in my own house. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just didn't want to see. But the closet remained my sanctuary, my coffin, my little wooden box where I could at least pretend I was safe. It's strange, isn't it? How the smallest spaces can feel like freedom when the rest of the world feels like a prison. I was 14 when the nurse called me into her office. It was a regular Wednesday morning, and we'd just finished gym class. I didn't think anything of it when the teacher handed me the pink slip. I thought maybe I'd forgotten to turn in a form or something simple like that. But when I walked into that room, the nurse didn't even look up right away. She just pointed to the chair and kept writing something in a chart. Then she glanced at me and said, "You've lost a lot of weight, Caroline. Is everything okay at home?" I froze. No one had ever asked me that before. Not even my mother. Not the teachers. Not the preacher. But the way she asked it, it was flat. Cold. Like she was reading a checklist, not speaking to a real person. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to lie, just to get out of there. But something in me cracked. "No," I whispered. She set her pen down. Finally looked at me. I saw something flash in her eyes, recognition. Maybe. Or worry. She stepped closer, gently pulled back the sleeve of my shirt, and saw the fading bruises. Then she asked, "Who's hitting you?" I couldn't say Jesse's name. I couldn't say Daddy's either. My throat locked up. I just stared at her, willing her to read my mind. She sighed. "Listen," she said. "Teen girls go through things. Mood swings. Family tension. Boys. It happens. But bruises like these, they could get your family in trouble. So, if you're looking for attention, don't make up stories you'll regret." That was it. That was her answer. She gave me a packet about nutrition and a note excusing me from gym for a week. Then she sent me back to class. She knew. She saw. And she chose silence. I remember sitting in the back of algebra class that afternoon, staring at the numbers on the board and thinking, if even the nurse won't help me, then who will? I started skipping school after that, hiding in the library or sneaking off to the park just to avoid the stares, the questions, the weight of being invisible in plain sight. Every adult I trusted turned their face away. Every system meant to protect me closed its doors. But something was growing inside me, and I didn't know it yet. Not until I missed my second period in a row. That's when the real fear began. I was still just a girl, barely 15. I didn't even know what pregnancy felt like. I thought it was just stomach bugs, or nerves, or maybe stress catching up to me. But when my period skipped a second month, something in me screamed louder than any voice in my head had ever dared. I stole a test from the pharmacy. I'd read enough teen magazines in the waiting room at the dentist's office to know what to look for. I slipped it into my jacket, walked out the door, and ran home like I was carrying a bomb. I waited until the house was empty. Jesse had gone to football practice. Daddy was working the swing shift. Mama was at the church folding bulletins. I locked myself in the bathroom, unwrapped the test with shaking hands, and sat there, staring. 2 pink lines. Positive. My whole body went cold. I slid down the bathroom wall, clutching that tiny stick like it had just ruined my life. And in a way it had, because in that moment, there was no more pretending. No more hiding in the closet. No more pushing it down and hoping it would go away. I was pregnant, and I knew exactly who the father was. I curled up on the tile floor, knees to my chest, and cried until my voice gave out. I kept whispering to myself, this can't be real. This can't be real. But it was. It was as real as the bruises on my back and the silence in my house. That night, Jesse came into my room again. I didn't fight. I didn't speak. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting for it to be over. When he was done, I finally said it. "I'm pregnant." He froze. Then he laughed. "You sure it's mine?" he said, grinning like it was a joke. "Maybe you've been messing around with someone else." I slapped him. It was the first time I ever fought back. My hand burned from the contact, but I didn't care. I looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not your toy." I never was. He didn't hit me. Not that night. He just stood there, stunned, and then left the room. I didn't sleep, because I knew it was only a matter of time before Daddy found out. And when he did, the belt wouldn't be the worst of it. He didn't just threaten me this time, he ruined me. I had barely survived the shock of the pregnancy test when Jesse decided to strike first. I don't know what fear drove him. Maybe the idea of being found out. Maybe the guilt trying to rot its way out of his soul. Or maybe he just wanted to make sure no one would ever believe me if I tried to speak. He told Daddy, but not the truth. He told him I'd been sneaking out. Said I was running around with boys from school, getting into cars at night, acting loose. He said he caught me sneaking back into the house late one evening with my clothes torn, makeup smeared, and no shame on my face. None of that was true. But Daddy didn't need proof. All he needed was a story. The second Jesse said it, I heard the kitchen chair scrape back hard against the floor. Daddy came storming into my room like a bull. No warning, no questions. He dragged me out by the arm, threw me down onto the living room rug in front of Mama, and shouted, "Your daughter's a damn whore." I remember Mama gasping. Her hand went to her chest like she'd just seen a ghost. I tried to explain, tried to scream, he's lying. Jesse did this to me. But my voice cracked before I could get the words out. Daddy's boot kicked over the coffee table. I work 16 hours a day to put food on this table, he roared, and this is what I get? A pregnant slut bringing shame on my house. Then he did what I'd feared since the day Jesse first touched me. He kicked me. Hard. In the ribs. I curled into myself on the floor, protecting the small life inside me with my arms, sobbing, begging for mercy. But there was none. He didn't stop until Mama finally screamed for him to get away from me. Even then, he spat on the floor and said, "She don't live here no more." He didn't throw Jesse out. No. He threw me out. My own mother didn't stop him. She just stood there, shaking, saying my name over and over like that would undo what had already happened. They made me pack a bag. One suitcase. No goodbye. No love. And Jesse stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the whole thing like he'd won a game he was never supposed to play. I slept behind the church that night, on the cold ground, with nothing but my jacket and a baby growing inside me. I'd never felt so alone. But somewhere deep down, I heard a voice, my own voice, whisper, "Don't let this be the end." The night air bit through my clothes like needles. I was 15, pregnant, bruised, and homeless. I sat behind the old Baptist church, knees drawn to my chest, my back against the brick wall. Every sound made me flinch, the rustle of dry leaves, the occasional hum of a passing car, a dog barking blocks away. I was terrified someone would find me. And yet, deep down, I hoped someone would. Around midnight, I started shaking so badly I thought my heart would give out. The coat I'd grabbed on my way out was thin and torn at the sleeves. I tucked my hands under my thighs and tried to stay awake. Sleep meant dreams, and dreams always took me back to Jesse. I couldn't bear that. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow. Cautious. I panicked. Tried to get up, but my legs had gone numb from the cold. Then I saw her. She was maybe in her 50s, wrapped in a heavy blue coat, carrying a paper bag and a thermos. Her hair was gray at the edges, her eyes soft and tired, like someone who'd known pain long before I ever did. She stopped when she saw me. "Child," she said gently, "you don't belong out here." I didn't answer. Couldn't. She knelt down in front of me and offered the thermos. "It's just tea. Won't fix the world, but it'll warm you a little." I took it. My hands trembled as I sipped. The heat hit my throat and burned a little, but it felt like a small kind of salvation. She didn't ask my name. She didn't push. She just sat beside me for a few minutes in silence, then took off her coat and wrapped it around my shoulders. "I've been there," she whispered. "Not exactly your path, but I've walked close enough to know the ache." And then she left. Just like that. I never saw her again. Never got her name. But that coat stayed with me for years. Through shelters. Through shame. Through long, sleepless nights and quiet mornings where I questioned whether I'd make it to the next day. That coat reminded me, not everyone turns their back. Some people, even strangers, carry light in the darkness. And sometimes, a little warmth is all it takes to keep a soul from shattering. The next morning, I walked 5 miles into town. My body ached with every step. My back was sore from the cold bricks. My ribs throbbed where Daddy's boot had landed. But I kept walking, because the alternative was lying down and waiting to disappear. I'd heard about a church-run shelter a few streets over. People said it took in girls like me. Runaways. The desperate. I didn't know what to expect, but I figured if they had a bed and a blanket, I'd say whatever they wanted to hear. When I got there, I stood outside the door for half an hour. I watched other girls come and go, some younger than me, some already carrying babies on their hips. I thought, maybe I belong here. Finally, I stepped inside. It was a converted school building, old wooden floors, the smell of instant coffee and bleach in the air. The woman at the front desk looked up at me like I was another number in a long line of broken things. "Name?" she asked. Caroline, I said, voice low. She scribbled it down, asked my age, then said, "You'll need to speak to Sister Elaine for intake." Down the hall, second door. Sister Elaine was tall, thin, and wore glasses on a chain. Her office smelled like paper and peppermint. She asked the usual questions: where I came from, how long I'd been out, whether I had any addictions. Then she asked, "Do you know who the father is?" I hesitated. Then I said it. "My brother." There was silence. She didn't write anything down. Just stared at me, her lips pressed into a tight line. "I see," she said finally. "And have you reported this to the police?" "No," I whispered. "Do you plan to?" I shrugged. No one would believe me. She looked away, toward the window. The air changed. Her warmth, whatever had been there in the beginning, evaporated. "We have rules here," she said. "Strict ones. We're not equipped to handle certain situations. Incest complicates things. It opens doors we can't support legally." I blinked. "So, I can't stay?" She folded her hands. "I'm sorry, Caroline. I truly am. But we have young mothers here, children. We can't risk the liability. I'll give you the number to a social worker who might help." I sat there for a moment, stunned. I wasn't in danger. I was in danger. But none of that mattered. She handed me a pamphlet, a list of names and numbers. I didn't take it. I walked out. The sun was already setting. The coat from the stranger still wrapped around me. I stood on the curb, watching families drive by in minivans, wondering what kind of world punishes the victim and protects the predator. I wasn't just homeless now. I was unwanted, even by the people who claim to follow a loving God. The public library downtown closed at 6 p.m. The grocery store locked its doors at 9. By 10:30, the only place still open was the 24-hour gas station just off Main Street. It had flickering lights, broken tile floors, and a single public restroom in the back, one with a stall that didn't quite latch. That stall became my home. For 3 nights, I slept there. Curled up on the toilet seat, my legs tucked close to my chest, the stranger's coat draped over me like a shield. I'd stuff toilet paper into my ears to muffle the sound of passing trucks. I'd lock the bathroom door from the inside and pray no one would bang on it. The first night, I sobbed until my throat went raw. The second night, I didn't cry. I just sat in silence, my hand on my stomach, listening to the terrifying stillness of everything. The third night, something changed. A woman came in around midnight. She didn't knock, just barged in with her phone held to her ear, cussing at someone on the other end. I stayed silent, hoping she'd think the bathroom was empty. But then she saw my feet under the stall door. She paused. "What the hell?" she said. I held my breath. "Hey," she called out. "You okay in there?" I didn't answer. She banged her fist against the door. "Girl, I can see your damn shoes. You in trouble." Still, I said nothing. A few seconds passed. Then her voice softened. "You don't gotta be scared. I've slept in worse places. Ain't no shame in it." I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I did. She left without saying anything else. But before the door shut behind her, I saw her hand reach back and place something on the sink. A pack of crackers, a bottle of water, and 5 crumpled dollar bills. That small act, it felt like mercy, like the world hadn't fully given up on me just yet. But I knew this couldn't last. My body was wearing down. I was starting to cramp. The nausea came in waves. The baby was still early, but I could feel the changes. And I hadn't seen a doctor. I hadn't eaten anything but vending machine snacks in days. I needed real help. And I didn't know where to go until I remembered an old name. One I hadn't thought about in years. Miss Evelyn, my 8th grade English teacher. She was the only adult who ever saw through my fake smiles. And maybe, just maybe, she'd still remember the girl who used to write poems about running away. Her house was on Elm Street, 2 blocks from the elementary school, in a white clapboard home with yellow shutters and ivy crawling up the side. I remembered it well. I'd passed by it 100 times on the school bus, always wondering what kind of peace a person must feel living in a place like that. I didn't even know if she'd still be there. It had been almost 2 years since I'd last seen her. But I had nowhere else. I walked the long stretch barefoot. My shoes had fallen apart the day before. My feet were swollen and blistered. I wore the same clothes I'd been thrown out in. The coat hid my growing belly, but not the shame on my face. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the doorbell. Then I pressed it. And waited. I heard footsteps. Slow. Careful. Then the door creaked open. Miss Evelyn stood there in a long gray sweater and reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Her hair was tied back like always, but her eyes were exactly how I remembered them. Warm. Sharp. Human. She looked at me. At first, confusion. Then recognition. Then something deeper. Caroline, she whispered, like she didn't trust her own voice. I nodded. Hi, Miss Evelyn. And before I could say another word, she stepped forward and pulled me into her arms. I hadn't been hugged in so long, I didn't know what to do. I stood stiff at first, then let go and sobbed into her shoulder like a child who finally found home after being lost in the woods. She held me tighter. When she pulled back, her eyes brimmed with tears. My God, what happened to you? I couldn't say it yet. I just shook my head and said, I need help. She didn't ask anything more that night. She brought me inside, sat me on her couch, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and brought me soup. She ran a bath and gave me clean clothes from a box she kept for donations. She didn't pry. She didn't push. She just cared. I stayed silent for hours. Ate slowly. Sat under that warm light like I was thawing from inside out. Later that night, she knelt beside the couch where I'd curled up and whispered, whatever happened, you're safe now. And we'll figure it out. Together. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. The next morning, I woke up on her couch with the sun pouring through the windows like honey. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then I felt the weight of the blanket on me, the quiet of the house, the smell of eggs cooking in the kitchen, and I remembered I wasn't behind a gas station or curled up on a cold church floor. I was in a place where no one had raised their voice at me. Not yet. Miss Evelyn was at the stove when I walked in. She turned, smiled, and said, "There's coffee if you want some. Decaf, just in case." She didn't say the word pregnant, but I knew she already saw it in the way I walked, in the way my sweater hung loose around my stomach. We sat across from each other at her little round table. I took small bites, barely tasting the food. My hands trembled with every sip of coffee. Then, softly, she said, "Caroline, you don't have to tell me anything. But if you're ready, I'll listen. No judgment. No interruptions. Just you and me." I looked down at my plate for a long time. My mouth was dry. My heart beat so loud I could hear it in my ears. And then I told her. Everything. I started with Jesse. The first time he touched me. How I tried to push him away. How it didn't matter. How he used silence as a weapon, and how Daddy made sure my voice stayed buried with threats and bruises. I told her about the night I said I was pregnant. About how Jesse laughed. About how Daddy threw me on the floor and kicked me until I couldn't breathe. I told her about the nurse who said nothing. The shelter that turned me away. The bathroom stall that became my bed. The woman who gave me crackers and a coat and walked away without asking my name. Miss Evelyn didn't move, didn't flinch. She didn't say a word until I was finished, until my voice cracked into nothing and the room went quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. She stood, walked over, knelt down beside me, and held my face in her hands. "You survived," she whispered. "You survived hell, Caroline. And now you're here. And you're not going back." I broke down. Again. But this time, my tears weren't just from pain. They were from release. From knowing someone finally heard me, believed me, She promised to help me find a doctor. Promised we'd go to the authorities together, on my terms. That she'd be by my side every step of the way. And in that moment, I knew I'd found something I hadn't had since I was a little girl. A mother. Not by blood, but by love. Miss Evelyn kept her promise. By the end of that week, she had called in every favor she'd ever earned. She found a women's clinic in the next county over, one with a nurse practitioner she trusted, and no ties to local gossip or judgment. She drove me there herself in her old Chevy, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. I could tell she was nervous too, though she never let it show. The clinic was quiet, painted in soft pastel colors with lullabies humming faintly through overhead speakers. It was made to feel gentle, safe, like a place where healing could happen. A nurse led me into a room, asked a few questions, took my blood, measured my belly. Then the doctor came in. A kind-eyed woman with gray streaks in her braid and a voice like calm water. She didn't flinch when I said the father was my brother. She didn't look away, just nodded slowly, as though she'd heard stories like mine before and believed every word. She did an ultrasound. I lay back on the table, cold gel on my skin, my heart thumping like thunder in my ears. Miss Evelyn stood beside me, holding my hand. And then, there it was. A heartbeat, a flickering sound, rapid and alive. For a second, I forgot to breathe. There, the doctor said, pointing to the small screen. That's your baby. And based on size and development, you're around 22 weeks along. 22. I turned my head slowly toward Miss Evelyn. She nodded, but I saw the worry in her eyes. That far? I asked. The doctor smiled gently. Yes, honey, that baby's growing strong. I didn't know what to feel. Shock, mostly. Maybe fear. But also wonder. Because no matter how that child came to be, it was real now. And it was mine. Afterward, we sat in the car in the clinic parking lot, just the two of us. Miss Evelyn handed me a bottle of water and said, "You don't have to decide anything right now. But whatever you choose, keeping the baby, adoption, anything, I'll be here." I looked down at my stomach, which suddenly felt more like a future than a burden. "I don't want to give it away," I whispered. "I want to give it a better life than mine." She smiled, but her eyes shimmered. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt the tiniest flicker of something I hadn't known in years. Hope. We waited until after my second prenatal visit. Miss Evelyn said I needed to be strong enough, emotionally and physically, before we sat down with anyone official. She was right. I wasn't the girl hiding in a bathroom stall anymore. I was still bruised, still afraid, but I was no longer silent. And that made all the difference. We went to the sheriff's office on a gray Tuesday morning. Not the one in our town. Too many familiar faces there. Too many men who played poker with my father or waved at Jesse from football bleachers. Miss Evelyn knew someone in the next county. A retired officer named Howard Nolan, now working as a victim's advocate. She said he had daughters, that he understood pain when it spoke plain and without drama. We sat in a small office with a fake plant in the corner and a coffee pot that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Officer Nolan came in, heavy-set and slow-moving, with tired eyes and a careful voice. He listened. That's the part I'll never forget. He didn't interrupt, didn't doubt. He let me talk, let me tremble. I told him everything, from the first time Jesse touched me to the night Daddy threw me out. I didn't sugarcoat it. I spoke like someone who had nothing left to lose. When I finished, the room was silent. Then he nodded and said, "You're not crazy. You're not lying. And you're not alone." I broke down again. Miss Evelyn squeezed my hand so hard I thought she'd never let go. Officer Nolan filed the report personally. He said we'd need to do a forensic interview. That he'd contact Child Protective Services. That, given my age and the evidence, this wouldn't just go away. A few days later, they arrested Jesse. He was caught off guard. I heard he cried when they put the cuffs on him. Said I was lying. Said I was just making things up for attention. But this time, it didn't work. This time, someone listened. As for my father, he wasn't arrested right away. But after what he'd done, after what I told them about the beatings and threats, they opened a separate case. A social worker said they'd be watching the household closely. Mama refused to talk to the police. Said I was confused, that Jesse would never do something like that. But it didn't matter anymore. I had my truth. And people finally believed me. That night, I looked in the mirror at Miss Evelyn's house. My belly had started to show. The bruises had begun to fade. For the first time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a hug. Maybe tears. Maybe for her to finally choose me. But deep down, I think I already knew. It had been 2 weeks since Jesse's arrest. The news had spread like wildfire through town, people whispering in pews, side eyes at the grocery store, Mrs. Palmer from 3 doors down calling it a shame, a scandal. I'd kept quiet, mostly, focused on doctor visits and meetings with Officer Nolan. Miss Evelyn was my anchor through it all. But there was still a knot in my chest I couldn't shake. My mother. She hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't come looking for me. And despite everything she should have done, everything a mother is supposed to be, I still wanted her. I still hoped she'd open her arms, look me in the eye, and say, I'm sorry. So I went back to the house. Not to move in. Just to see her. The front yard looked the same. Jesse's old bicycle was still leaning against the fence. The porch light was still crooked from where Daddy kicked it last winter. I walked up the steps slowly, my hands shaking. I knocked once, then twice. Finally, the door opened. Mama stood there in her bathrobe, hair tied back, holding a dish towel. Her eyes landed on my stomach first, and I saw the flicker of shame, of something ugly rise to the surface. Then she looked at me. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice flat. Cold. I swallowed hard. I just wanted to talk to you. Mama, he hurt me. Jesse. You know he did. She said nothing. I tried again. They believed me. The police. The doctor. I didn't lie. You know I didn't. Still, nothing. Please, I whispered. Say something. She stared at me a long moment, then glanced over her shoulder like she didn't want the neighbors to see. Then she said the one sentence that's carved itself into my bones for the rest of my life. You're not my daughter anymore. And she closed the door. Not slammed, exactly, but firm. Final. Like sealing a coffin. I stood there on the porch for a while, staring at the wood grain of that door, hoping maybe she'd come back. Maybe she'd open it and say she didn't mean it. She never did. I walked away with my hand on my belly and my heart caving in. But by the time I reached the end of the street, something inside me shifted. I realized I'd spent my whole life trying to earn love from people who never knew how to give it. And now I had someone else to live for. Someone who would know love the moment they opened their eyes. The labor came early. I was just past 35 weeks when I felt the first sharp wave tear through my back. It was the middle of the night, and Miss Evelyn was asleep in her chair with a book in her lap. I didn't want to wake her, not at first. I tried to breathe through it like the nurse had taught me. Count to 10. Close my eyes. Stay calm. But the pain came harder. Closer. My knees buckled by the second hour, and I called out her name. She was by my side instantly, already grabbing her keys, already holding my hand, already whispering, "It's time, baby. We're going to get you through this." The drive was a blur. Rain on the windshield. Headlights bleeding across the road. My breath coming in ragged gasps as the contractions rolled through me like thunder. By the time we reached the hospital, I could barely speak. They rushed me into a room, the nurses buzzing around me like bees, attaching monitors, checking vitals, shouting updates I couldn't hold onto. And then, just like that, it was time to push. It hurt in ways I didn't have words for. My body felt like it was splitting open, like years of silence and pain were being forced out all at once. But I pushed. Again and again. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about someone new. Someone innocent. And then I heard it. The cry. High-pitched. Fierce. Alive. They placed him in my arms, wrapped in a blue and white blanket, his skin red and wrinkled, his mouth searching for comfort. And then I saw them. His eyes. Big. Round. Green like Jesse's. For a moment, my breath caught in my throat. All the air left the room. Those eyes, those were the eyes that had haunted me. The ones that used to leer at me in the dark. The ones that stared through me like I was nothing. Now they were looking up at me from the face of a baby. A baby I created. A baby who had done nothing wrong. Tears poured from me like rain. But not from fear. From grief. From love. From the ache of it all, tangled together in a single breath. I don't blame you, I whispered, brushing my thumb across his cheek. You're not him. You're mine. Miss Evelyn stood beside me, tears sliding down her face as she said, You're a mother now, Caroline. And you're not alone. I named him Samuel. Not after anyone. Just something that came to me in that moment. Samuel. A new name. A new life. A new beginning. He came from darkness, but he would not live in it. And neither would I. It happened 3 weeks after Samuel was born. I was still healing, body torn from birth, heart tender from everything that had come before. But I was moving forward. Slowly. Samuel was healthy, sleeping in a bassinet beside Miss Evelyn's bed. I was attending trauma counseling twice a week, learning how to say the words rape, abuse, betrayal without falling apart. Then the letter arrived. No return address. Just my name scrawled across the envelope in stiff handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a typed note and a cashier's check. $10,000. The note read, For your trouble. Let this be the last time you speak our names. You got what you wanted. Don't drag the family down with your stories. D.H. D.H. My father. The check stared up at me like a threat dressed as a gift. Cold. Soulless. Meant to buy silence. $10,000. That's what he thought my pain was worth. Not a call. Not an apology. Not a single word of acknowledgement that his son had violated me and that he himself had beaten me half to death. Just money. Blood money. I stared at that check for a long time. My heart raced. Part of me wanted to tear it up right then and there. Another part, the broken, bruised girl I used to be, wondered if maybe I should take it. I had a baby now. I needed diapers. Formula. Clothes. I had nothing, but I wasn't that girl anymore. I showed the letter to Miss Evelyn. She didn't speak for a full minute. Then she said, very softly, If you keep that check, Caroline, they'll think they won. They'll think your voice can be bought. We took it to Officer Nolan. He made a copy of the letter and check for the file. Then we mailed the original back to my father, with one note of our own, handwritten in ink. My voice is not for sale. My son is not your shame. You don't get to silence me. Not now. Not ever. That was the last time I ever heard from him. I don't know if Jesse ever saw the letter. By then, he was sitting in county jail awaiting trial. But it didn't matter. I had drawn the line, and I knew no amount of money could ever undo what they did to me. But standing up? That had its own kind of wealth. The courtroom smelled like old paper and wood polish. It reminded me of our high school library, except no one here was whispering out of respect. They were whispering out of tension, anticipation, judgment. Jesse sat on the far side of the room in a pressed shirt and tie, hair combed, hands cuffed. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not weak, just contained. Like the boy who used to barge into my room in the dark had been stuffed into a box too tight for him to stretch his lies. When I walked in with Miss Evelyn and the district attorney, I didn't look away. I wanted him to see me. Not the broken, shaking girl he used to control, but the mother. The survivor. The witness. He looked up. For a second, I swear he tried to smirk. But it faltered. My silence had always made him feel powerful, but now I had a voice and the law behind me. The courtroom was full. Neighbors, old teachers, strangers, even some people from the church who used to smile at me like I was just another pretty Hughes girl. They heard everything. The DA didn't sugarcoat it. He laid it out clear: timeline, testimonies, trauma reports, medical records, prenatal documentation. The jury saw pictures, heard the audio from my statement, listened to the words Jesse had texted me once, threats I'd saved and forgotten I'd even had the strength to collect. And then it was my turn. I stood at the witness stand, my palms sweaty, my legs trembling beneath the table. The bailiff swore me in. I looked out at the faces before me, some judgmental, some confused, some already siding with Jesse because of who our family was. Then I opened my mouth, and for the next 45 minutes, I told my story, from beginning to end, in detail, with calmness, with heartbreak, with fury. The room was silent. Even Jesse didn't interrupt. Maybe he knew better now. Or maybe he finally realized the version of me he abused didn't exist anymore. When I finished, I looked directly at the jury and said, he didn't just hurt me. He ended the girl I used to be. But what he didn't expect is that I'd come back stronger. The judge didn't react. The court reporter kept typing. But I knew something had shifted. I sat back down, my hands still trembling, but something deep inside me had gone quiet. A storm that had finally passed. And in that silence, I felt powerful. They convicted him the following week. 18 years. 18 years for the 18 months of hell he put me through. Some said it wasn't enough. Maybe they were right. But to me, it was justice in motion. And as I walked out of that courthouse holding my son, I realized the wind no longer stung my face the way it used to. The trial was over. Jesse was gone. My father had vanished from my life entirely. My mother, well, I stopped holding my breath for her a long time ago. It should have felt like freedom. And in a way, it did. But healing isn't instant. No judge's gavel can erase trauma. No conviction can sew your soul back together overnight. I was 20 pounds lighter than when I gave birth. My hands still shook when a man raised his voice nearby. I'd wake in the middle of the night, gasping, Samuel crying beside me as if he could feel my dreams unraveling. Still, I was surviving. Miss Evelyn helped me enroll in GED classes. I started part-time cleaning work at a dentist's office. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. And each week, I set aside $5 in a jar labeled Sam's Future. One morning, after I'd dropped Samuel off at a church-run daycare, I came home to find Miss Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table, holding a letter. Her hands were trembling. "What is it?" I asked. She looked up, eyes wide. You got something in the mail." She handed it to me. It was from an organization I'd never heard of, one that offered scholarships and support to survivors of abuse. Turns out, someone, an anonymous donor, had submitted my story. Maybe it was Officer Nolan. Maybe a nurse. Maybe someone sitting in that courtroom. The letter said I'd been selected for a full-ride scholarship to study social work. Housing included. Childcare covered. Trauma therapy provided. I blinked. Read the letter again. And again. Then I cried. Because for the first time in my life, someone wasn't just rescuing me. They were investing in me. I looked at Samuel napping in his crib, his tiny hands curled into fists, his lips pursed in that peaceful little pout he always made when he dreamed. And I whispered, "We're going to be okay." That letter was more than a scholarship. It was a miracle. Not the kind with angels and glowing lights, but the kind that finds you on an ordinary Tuesday, in the quiet middle of your survival, and says you matter. It was part of the scholarship program, community service, they called it. But for me, it was more than a requirement. It was a chance to give what I never had, a voice that didn't tremble, a hand that reached back into the fire to pull someone else out. The women's shelter was a small place tucked between a pawn shop and a boarded-up laundromat. Nothing fancy. Fluorescent lights. Folding chairs. Coffee that tasted like burnt pennies. But the women there, they were me. Different faces, different stories, same ache behind the eyes. When I stood at the front of that room, clutching my index cards with sweaty palms, I almost backed out. I looked around at the women in the seats, some nursing babies, some with bruises still purple, some staring at the floor like they didn't believe anything could ever change. But then I saw her, a girl in the back. Couldn't have been older than 16. Hair pulled into a messy bun. Shoulders tight, like she was trying to fold herself out of existence. That was me, a lifetime ago. So I started. I didn't read from the cards. I just spoke. Told them what happened to me. The nights I slept in a gas station bathroom. The moment my mother told me I wasn't her daughter. The birth of my son. The trial. The miracle. I told them how healing doesn't come with balloons or applause. How some days I still wake up afraid. But I also told them how Samuel's laugh can wipe out a whole day's worth of pain. How education became my weapon. How kindness, from a stranger, from a teacher, from a tired cop, had kept me breathing. When I finished, the room was quiet. No applause. Just stillness. And then, from the back, that girl raised her hand. Her voice cracked when she spoke. Did you ever feel like dying? I didn't blink. Yes, I said. But I didn't. And I'm here to tell you not to either. She cried. I walked back to her, sat beside her, held her hand. And that was the moment I knew my pain hadn't been wasted. It had grown roots. It had bloomed into something bigger than survival. It had become a lifeline. It had been almost 4 years since the trial. Samuel was starting preschool. He loved finger painting and peanut butter sandwiches. He had a laugh that filled every room, and he still had Jesse's eyes, but they didn't haunt me anymore. Because they were Samuel's now. Pure. Uncorrupted. His alone. I was halfway through my degree in social work, with a minor in trauma counseling. I was working weekends at a nonprofit that helped survivors find safe housing. Life wasn't easy, but it was mine. And it was real. Then, out of nowhere, the letter came. Postmarked from the state penitentiary. I almost threw it away. My hands shook as I opened it. I could feel that old fear crawl up my spine, but I wasn't the same scared girl anymore. I was a woman. A mother. A fighter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Jesse's. It wasn't long. Just 2 pages. Neat. Careful. Like he was trying too hard to be someone else. Caroline, I don't expect you to read this. I don't even expect you to believe me. But I need to say it. What I did to you is evil. No excuses. No justification. You were my sister, and I destroyed you. I think about it every night. I think about the baby. I heard you had a son. I don't know if he knows who I am, and I hope he never does. I've been going to therapy here. Prison therapy, yeah, but it's something. And my counselor told me I should write to you. Not for closure. Not for pity. But because I need to ask. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I broke you. And if you ever find it in your heart, I'm asking for forgiveness. Not so I can move on, but so you can. I stared at the letter for a long time. Forgiveness. That word had followed me like a shadow. People tossed it around like candy. Preachers preached it. Therapists encouraged it. But no one, not one person, had ever earned it from me, and Jesse didn't either. So I wrote him back. 1 page. No warmth. No hate. Just truth. Jesse, I don't forgive you. What you did can't be undone. You stole my childhood. You left me in a pile of bones and silence. But you don't get to ask me to clean that up for you. I've built a life without your name in it. I have a son. I have a future. I have peace not because of you, but in spite of you. So no, I don't forgive you. But I am free. That's more than you'll ever be. I never heard from him again. And I didn't need to, because I wasn't waiting for justice anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology to breathe. I had already won. I share my story now not for sympathy, But for every woman watching this who thinks her voice doesn't matter, it does. You matter. And if you're still here, still listening, I want you to know, you're not broken. You're not dirty. You're not too late. Please like this video. Share it with someone who needs it. And if you feel safe, drop a comment. Tell me where you're from. I want to know where my sisters are, all over the world. Because we survived. And we are not silent anymore.